Welcome back, guys. In today's video, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the inevitable deluge of, how should we put it, jargon and buzzwords that you're going to come into contact with when you start trying to build your brand. And that could be whether you engage with a branding agency, or it could be whether you go on a course, or whether you read some books around branding yourself. Inevitably, you're going to come into contact with a whole host of terms, concepts that are going to seem really confusing to you. And there's an awful lot of people out there who seem to want to make branding seem a lot more complicated than it necessarily needs to be, but maybe that's a topic for a separate video. Suffice to say, I think there are some key topics that it's really helpful to get a good grasp of, and we're going to look at those today. And I think hopefully that will give you guys a really good foundation for kind of digesting the rest of this other stuff. A lot of it tends to be variations on a theme once you understand the kind of key concepts. We're going to look at 4 areas broadly. Is the big picture stuff, there's brand personality stuff, there's customer experience stuff, and then there's the tools we need to kind of bring our brand into the world. Number 1, brand equity. Brand equity simply refers to how much value is inherently tied up inside a brand's visual aesthetic and current incarnation. It's a term that you'll mostly see applied and spoken about in the context of brand refreshes or brand redesigns, when it becomes very important to not lose any of that inherent value and trust which is built up in the eyes of the consumer, but also move the brand forward. In that example, we might say, okay, but how much brand equity are we going to lose by making this change to our brand? Or how do we retain our current brand equity, but move this brand forward in the direction that we want to go? Number 2, brand strategy. Brand strategy simply refers to the act of having an intentional plan around how you intend to develop your brand and how your brand is going to show up when it comes into contact with customers. How do you want to appear? What perceptions do you want your customers to have when they come into contact with your brand? What feelings are they going to have? A brand strategy document just lays all of this out in plain English, and it can act as your guidepost, your map and your compass when it comes to making business decisions. Is this a decision which is in line with our long-term brand strategy? Having a formalized brand strategy rather than something that's just made up as you go along or done intuitively, which can lead to kind of wild shifts based on how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. Once you actually get that brand strategy in place and formalized and written down in a place and begin referring to it and using it, it can be a really powerful tool for your business. Now, I've actually created a video on how you can start implementing a brand strategy in as little as 5 minutes. And believe you me, just being slightly intentional about this will get you ahead of 99% of your competitors who in all likelihood are not doing this and are just making it up as they go along. So check that video out and get your brand strategy in place today. 3, brand positioning. This simply refers to the unique space in the market that your brand occupies versus your competitors' brands. Simple as that. So this is really useful to start thinking about, because clearly as a brand, you want to occupy a unique space. The space that you occupy in the market, you want that to be unique to your brand. And that way the messaging that you're putting out there isn't being diluted. There isn't someone else saying something very similar. It allows you to be unique, and it allows you to have a really clear proposition. Now, how you start thinking about this, there's a few really simple exercises you can do, and the traits that you use are going to depend on the sector that you're in. But let's just say, for example, that we take traditional and innovation as 2 traits, and luxury and value as another trait, and we draw a 4-quadrant graph and we begin to plot our position, the position of our brand and our competitors' brands on that graph. So competitor A, well, we know that they are pushing the innovation drum, they're banging that drum, it's all about innovation for those guys, so they're high up on that scale, and they're also trying to be they're a high-end product or service too, so they're going to be higher up on the luxury scale. Competitor B, okay, they're a little bit more traditional in the way they go about things, and they're also pushing a little bit more of a value proposition, so they're going to be more down here. And once you start to do this, you can spot one, where it's advantageous for you to sit, or where the gaps are for your brand to sit, and two, what changes might you need to make to shift your position in the direction that you want to go. And it's an interesting thing, because you'll start to see brands that really get this right, and you can see that they've clearly thought about their position. You'll start to notice that everything else that they do within marketing, within their branding, within the messaging they put out there, within the colors that they use, tends to support the position they're trying to occupy. So if they're trying to occupy a sophisticated, luxurious position, there's a certain behavior that you have to behave in a certain way as a brand to occupy that space. And it's only if you know that you're trying to occupy that space, you can start leveraging other aspects of your marketing to support that position in the market. Number 4, brand values. These are just the principles that your brand stands for, both internally and externally, so they can relate to internal culture and also how your brand manifests itself in externally too. And it's I've spoken before on this channel about how I think brands are very much like people, and as individuals we all have our own set of core values that shape who we are, that essentially define our personalities, and brands are no different. So having these core set of values which guide us, which allow us to stay true to ourselves, is really critical to a brand, just as they are to individuals. So I would encourage you to really think about what those values are for you as a business, what you want to stand for, what are your non-negotiables, and get them written down. And it's a really valuable tool to help you guide and steer your business, ensuring that you stay true to yourself and true to the brand that you want to be. Number 5, brand personality. This is simply the act of attributing human personality traits to our brand. Now, we just spoke in the last step about how brands are just like people. So if that's the case, then what kind of person do you want your brand to be? Do you want it to show traits of seriousness, warmth? Do you want it to be friendly, fun, bold, caring, sincere? The list goes on. But really thinking about this and defining exactly what those traits are, what personality we want our brand to have, can really help us drive both differentiation in the mind of the consumer and also help foster connection in the mind of the consumer too. Number 6, tone of voice. We've already spoken a little bit about how brands are like people and how it can be useful for us to attribute human personality traits to our brand, and also about how thinking in terms of brand values can benefit our brand. Now, our tone of voice is how we actually reflect and manifest those values and those personality traits when we communicate. So we need to have a consistent tone of voice, and our tone of voice needs to align with the personality that we want our brand to have and the values that we've set for our brand. So if we've said that our brand values are around empathy and our personality is around warmth and sincerity, well, we need to make sure that our tone of voice embodies those traits, and being consistent with that and mindful about how we speak as a brand. And when, just to be clear, when we say speak as a brand, we're talking about anything that anybody sees or comes into contact with: written communication, headlines, website copy, social media. The overall tone of our communication needs to line up with our brand personality and those values that we set. Number 7, touch point. Anytime a customer comes into contact with your product or service or brand in any capacity at all, we refer to that as a touch point. Now that could be when they come into contact with your brand on a supermarket shelf. It could be when they come into contact with your website or your social media presence, or even when they come into contact with your invoice. Anytime your brand interacts externally, we refer to that as a touch point. Number 8. Brand awareness. How well do people recognize your brand? How memorable is it? Now there's a certain level of, let's call them super brands. I'm thinking your Nikes, your Coca-Colas. You could stop someone in the street randomly and show them a small section of a logo and they'd probably know exactly who it was. In fact, not Coca-Cola, McDonald's recently did a radio campaign in the UK where they rather cockily didn't even mention the name McDonald's. Their brand awareness is so high, they don't even need to mention the brand's name on a radio ad. Now, as small business owners and brand guardians for small businesses, it's unlikely that we're going to have the luxury to be able to behave like that. But we can still learn a lot from those big brands. We can still realize and acknowledge that brand awareness is a really critical thing to strive for in our marketing and in our communication. Brand awareness can help drive differentiation. It can help in the minds of consumers differentiate you from your competitors. And it can also create an opportunity for more premium pricing too. Number 9, visual identity. We've spoken already quite a bit today about some of the intangible aspects of branding. So brand personality, attributing human traits to brands and brands' tone of voice and things like that. Well, let's go back to basics now, shall we? Visual identity, quite simply, is how your brand looks. So it's your logo, it's your packaging design, it's the colors that you use, it's the font that you use, it's any visual language or icons that you've chosen to use. All of those things come together to form the visual aspect of your brand, and we call that your visual identity. Number 10, brand guidelines. Brand guidelines serve as your brand's rule book and manual. It should lay out exactly how the brand is to be used and how it should show up, what your brand can and can't do. Now, here's something I will say on brand guidelines. I've noticed that people treat brand guidelines as an immutable, unchanging document. They may engage the services of a design agency or a designer. They may go through the process of creating a brand themselves, and as part of that, they create a brand guideline document, and then they stick to it rigidly. And anything that isn't in the guideline document, no, we can't do that. That's not what our guidelines say. And that's not how you should treat your brand guidelines. Your brand guidelines should be a living document. I go back again to the analogy that I've used many times already in this video about brands being just like people. Well, no person is the same that they were 3 or 4 years ago. People evolve, people change, and brands need the space to do that too. Your brand guidelines serve as a framework in which your brand should operate, but it should never shackle your brand. It should never restrict you from doing new things, from trying out new ways of looking or sounding or speaking, as long as they fundamentally align with the vision that is laid out for your brand in terms of its values, in terms of its personality, in terms of how you want to be perceived. So brand guidelines, really crucial document, a really useful document, but make sure that you allow it to evolve and change with you to get the best out of it. So there you have it, guys. Hopefully that's cleared things up for you a little bit, and also given you some ideas about how you might be able to use some of these concepts for your own brand. If you did enjoy this video, please do consider liking and subscribing below. It really helped me out. There's also a link in the description to my free email newsletter. You can get some branding tips and tricks straight to your inbox there. I'll see you in the next one.